Ethan Carter was a man of immense wealth, yet he lived a life deliberately devoid of warmth. He viewed emotions as vulnerabilities, love a mere frivolous distraction. Sarah Miller, on the other hand, was a single mother clinging to hope. Her circumstances dire, with no safety net and nowhere else to turn. He only considered hiring her as his housekeeper because, frankly, no one else had applied for the position in the urgent time frame he required. But what began as a purely temporary, almost grudging arrangement, swiftly started to unravel every carefully constructed belief Ethan held about life, about love, and about the forgotten capacity to feel again. What secret, deeply buried pain was he concealing? And could Sarah, with her quiet strength and undeniable presence, be the one to finally heal it? Stay with us, because everything you think you know is about to change. Rain streaked down the tall, imposing windows of the Carter estate, each droplet seeming to echo the profound silence that had long haunted its grand halls. Inside, the house looked pristine, impeccably maintained, yet it felt hollow, much like its solitary owner. Ethan Carter stood by the massive glass doors of his office, his thumb flicking through unread messages on his phone with a look of perpetual annoyance etched onto his handsome features. His last housekeeper had quit that very morning, without a word of notice, citing emotional burnout. He didn't entirely blame her. He knew he was difficult. He preferred it that way, as it kept people at a distance. Mr. Carter, the candidate is here. His secretary, Susan, announced, peeking her head around the ornate doorframe. We didn't have time to interview more people, I'm afraid. This is the only one available before your flight this afternoon. Ethan didn't even bother to glance up. Fine. Send her in. He tossed his phone onto the polished mahogany desk with a resigned sigh, fully expecting another dull, uninspired interview with someone who would likely quit in less than a week. What he wasn't expecting was a young woman walking in with a baby nestled in her arms. She appeared to be in her early 30s, dressed in modest, sensible clothes, but every detail about her was spotless and neat. Her arms cradled a baby boy, no older than 1, who looked up with wide, curious eyes. Her own eyes were focused, determined, but there was a nervous energy shimmering just beneath the surface. Ethan's gaze narrowed, his brow furrowing. And who is this? He asked sharply, his voice cutting through the quiet room as he nodded curtly toward the child. My son, she said, her voice calm despite the clear disapproval radiating from him. His name is Liam. She took a small breath. I know bringing a child to an interview is unorthodox, Mr. Carter, but I didn't have another choice. I need this job desperately, and I have no one else to watch him. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, the displeasure sharp and unmistakable in his expression. This is a professional environment. Ms. Miller. Sarah Miller, she supplied. Well, Ms. Miller, this isn't a daycare. Sarah didn't flinch under his icy stare. I understand that, sir. But if you give me a chance, I promise you won't regret it. I'm hardworking, exceptionally clean, and respectful. I'll stay out of your way. My son won't be a problem. I guarantee it. Susan interjected gently, sensing the tension. Mr. Carter, we really don't have time to interview anyone else. She has excellent references. Truly. There was a protracted pause. Ethan looked down at Liam. The boy stared up at him with those wide, curious eyes, perfectly calm, utterly silent, and strangely unfazed by the stern man before him. Something inside Ethan, a long dormant part of him, twitched uncomfortably. Fine, he said at last. His voice clipped. You're hired. Temporarily. Sarah's shoulders relaxed. Just a fraction. But the relief was palpable. Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you. I'll be the judge of that, Ethan muttered, more to himself than to her. That was the beginning. Neither of them knew it yet. But this cold, transactional moment, born of necessity and desperation, would irrevocably shift the trajectory of both their lives. The first few days at the Carter estate were rough, almost jarring for Sarah. She found herself in a space that was undeniably grand, almost museum-like in its pristine condition, but utterly lifeless. Ethan kept to his rigid routine, leaving before dawn, returning late in the evening, and rarely speaking more than a terse sentence at a time. Sarah worked quietly, diligently, often carrying Liam in a soft sling against her chest as she scrubbed, polished, and cleaned. She was like a ghost in the vast house, efficient, invisible, just as he seemed to prefer. Then came the morning encounter. Ethan was at the breakfast nook, consuming his usual Spartan meal of dry toast and black coffee, when Sarah approached, Liam resting comfortably against her hip, contentedly chewing on a soft plastic spoon. I noticed the pantry's running low on a few staples, she said, her tone polite, neutral. Would you like me to pick up anything specific when I place the grocery order? Ethan didn't look up from his tablet. Handle it. Don't go overboard with unnecessary items. Sarah nodded and turned to leave. But as she did, Ethan's eyes briefly flicked towards Liam. The child had dropped his spoon, and it hit the marble floor with a soft, almost insignificant clatter. A minor sound, yet one that clearly irritated Ethan. Can you keep him out of the common areas? He said, his voice clipped and sharp. This isn't a playground. Sarah offered a gentle, almost imperceptible smile. Of course, Mr. Carter. My apologies for that. She walked away, bouncing Liam slightly in her arms. Her calm, composed tone, her refusal to be baited or become defensive, made something in Ethan twitch again, like a tiny crack appearing in a wall he hadn't even known was there. She never reacted defensively, never pushed back, and somehow, that was more disarming than any argument could have been. Over the next week, the dynamic in the house began to shift, but in the smallest, almost imperceptible of ways. Ethan started noticing things he usually made a point to ignore. He noticed how she hummed softly to herself while dusting the antique furniture. How she greeted the delivery driver by his first name. A small kindness that seemed foreign in his insulated world. How she rearranged the kitchen just slightly, making it more functional, more lived in, not just photogenically sterile. And Liam, always quiet, content, and oddly observant for his age. Never fussed, never screamed, just watched the world with those big, knowing eyes. Then came the music. One evening, Ethan returned home earlier than usual from a grueling, unproductive meeting. As he stepped inside the silent foyer, he heard something entirely foreign wafting through the house. Someone was singing. He followed the soft, melodic sound to the formal living room and stopped dead in his tracks, hidden by the archway. Sarah stood near the window, the fading sunlight catching the gentle sway of her movement as she rocked Liam in her arms, singing a lullaby so tender it seemed to melt into the very walls like sunlight through sheer curtains. Her voice was gentle, yes, but filled with an unspoken strength, a profound love that resonated in the quiet room. She looked up then and startled when she saw him standing there. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I didn't realize you were back." "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice stiffer than he intended. "Just keep the volume down." But his voice lacked its usual coldness, its sharp edge. In fact, something about him seemed unsure, almost off balance. That night, alone in the vast silence of his office, Ethan couldn't focus on his work. He kept hearing that lullaby, seeing Sarah's face in the dim light, the way she held her son, as if Liam was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. It was unsettling, but not in the way he was used to being unsettled by disruptions. This was different. It wasn't long before he caught himself standing quietly outside the kitchen door while Sarah made pancakes for herself and Liam, the scent unexpectedly nostalgic, or lingering in a hallway as Liam's happy giggles echoed from his playpen in the small room she'd converted. Something was undeniably shifting within the sterile walls of his house, and within him. One morning, he looked up from his black coffee to see Liam crawling determinedly toward him across the plush living room rug. The baby, with surprising strength, pulled himself up using Ethan's pant leg, wobbling unsteadily but grinning. Sarah rushed in, breathless. "Liam. Oh, Mr. Carter. I'm so sorry. He escaped while I was putting the dishes away." Ethan looked down, momentarily frozen. Liam just looked up at him, beaming, as if they were the oldest of friends. "He didn't hurt me," Ethan muttered, awkwardly adjusting his pant leg. Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "He's an explorer. That one. Always has been." Ethan didn't respond, but for the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about that unreserved smile, that innocent trust, that complete lack of fear. It was as if Liam saw something in him that even he didn't recognize anymore, or perhaps had deliberately buried. Later that week, he returned home to find the living room subtly transformed. A colorful basket of soft toys sat neatly in the corner, and a soft, knitted throw blanket was artfully draped over the arm of the sofa. He raised an eyebrow, a question forming. That night, he called Sarah into his office. "What's with the changes in the living room?" he asked, his tone surprisingly neutral, not unkind. Sarah hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I just thought the space could feel a little warmer, more like a home. But I could take it all down if you prefer." "Of course." Ethan paused, his gaze drifting to a point beyond her shoulder, then slowly shook his head. "No. It's fine. Just let me know next time." "Of course, Mr. Carter." As she turned to leave, Liam asleep in her arms, Ethan found himself staring, not at her beauty or her figure, but the profound peace on her face as she looked at her son. He hadn't felt peace in years, not true peace, and for the first time, he wondered what else, what vital parts of life he had been missing. By the third week, something unspoken, something powerful, was unfolding at the Carter estate. Something Ethan Carter couldn't categorize, couldn't control, and certainly hadn't anticipated. It began with the simplest moments: a misplaced toy car found under the heavy dining table, Claire's soft laugh drifting down the hall as she fed Liam his lunch, the unexpected warmth of sunlight filtering through a window she'd opened without asking, letting in fresh air and bird song. His world, once meticulously governed by silence and rigid structure, had started to shift, to breathe. And Ethan didn't know whether to resist it with all his might or simply let it swallow him whole. One afternoon, he arrived home earlier than usual, hoping to review a complex contract in the solitude of his study. But as he stepped inside, he heard the unmistakable sound of giggling. Real, uninhibited, childlike laughter, soon joined by Sarah's own joyful peals. He followed the sound like a thread, drawn by an unfamiliar curiosity, only to find Sarah in the living room, down on all fours, crawling with Liam through an impromptu maze constructed of couch cushions and draped blankets. She hadn't seen him yet, too caught up in the delightful moment. Her hair was loose, a few strands clinging to her flushed cheeks, and the light in her eyes as she engaged with her son. God, it stunned him. He should have turned around, retreated to his office, and pretended he hadn't seen this intrusion of domesticity. But instead, he stood there, frozen, a bitter, unfamiliar taste forming in his throat. Because watching them, witnessing such unadulterated joy, felt like stumbling into someone else's life. A life he'd long ago convinced himself he could never be a part of, nor even desired. Sarah finally noticed him and scrambled to her feet, hastily brushing her hair back from her face. "Mr. Carter, I didn't expect you this early. I can clean all this up immediately." "No," he said, his voice surprisingly low, almost husky. "It's fine." She stared at him, cautious, her expression guarded. "I hope it's not too informal. I try to keep Liam out of your way as much as possible." He shook his head, his gaze sweeping around the room. The space, once a sterile showroom, now pulsed with an undeniable life, a warmth it had never known under his sole occupancy. "It's the first time this house has looked lived in." Sarah relaxed, just slightly, a small, relieved smile touching her lips. He makes every place feel like home, whether you want him to or not. Ethan didn't smile. Not outwardly, but he didn't leave either. Instead, he found himself asking, "Was this what your life was like before you came here?" Her eyes, usually so bright, darkened for a moment. She lowered herself to sit on the floor beside Liam, who was now batting at a loose cushion tassel. She nodded. Sort of. It was a lot messy, eh? Financially and emotionally. I was juggling 2 part-time jobs, barely making ends meet. Then my husband, he just left. Without warning. Took what little savings we had and disappeared. I had no family to fall back on. No one. This was the only place that said yes when I needed it most. Ethan said nothing for a long time, the silence stretching between them, filled only by Liam's soft babbling. Then, almost absently, he asked, "And yet, you still managed to smile." Sarah met his gaze directly, her own clear and unwavering. "What else can I do? Mr. Carter. If I fall apart, who's going to hold him together?" That night, Ethan sat in his office, the contract forgotten. Sarah's words haunted him, echoing in the stillness. He found himself opening a drawer in his desk, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside, nestled beneath old business papers, was an old photograph, him and Jessica, on the beach, years ago, before everything imploded. He remembered believing in forever once, believing that love could indeed hold a person together, make them whole. But after Jessica's devastating betrayal, he'd systematically buried that belief with every brick of success he laid in his corporate empire, walling himself off until Sarah Miller walked into his life with a baby in her arms and a quiet, resilient strength that refused to be ignored or dismissed. The next morning, Sarah was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes one-handed with Liam perched confidently on her hip. Ethan entered, not with his usual stiff, formal posture, but carrying a small stack of unopened personal letters. He paused, inhaling deeply. "Smells good." Sarah turned, surprised by the uncharacteristic warmth in his tone. "It's just breakfast." "It's more than that," he said, his gaze lingering on her. "I haven't eaten pancakes in, well, it must be 15 years. She laughed, a genuine, musical sound that seemed to brighten the already sunlit kitchen. "Well, maybe it's time to start over then." He sat at the large kitchen island, watching her move through the kitchen with an easy grace, like she truly belonged there. She wasn't just keeping the house clean. She was, in her own unassuming way, healing it. And maybe, unknowingly, healing him, too. Later that day, as he passed the open door of the nursery room he'd previously barely acknowledged, he caught sight of her singing softly to Liam, whispering sweet, imaginative stories as the baby clung to her finger, his eyelids growing heavy. The tenderness in her voice, the sheer, unconditional love radiating from her, stirred something sharp and poignant in his chest, a feeling akin to longing. That evening, he found himself knocking gently on her door, an act that felt both foreign and significant. She opened it, still holding a now drowsy Liam. I wanted to ask if you'd join me for dinner tomorrow. Nothing formal. Just here. At home. Sarah blinked, clearly taken aback. Me. Ethan shifted, a rare display of discomfort. Yes. I thought maybe it would be nice for Liam, too. A change. She hesitated for a moment. Then a soft smile touched her lips. Okay. But only if you help me cook. The next evening was quiet, intimate, and wonderfully strange in its simplicity. Ethan found himself awkwardly chopping vegetables while Sarah expertly marinated chicken. Liam played contentedly on a blanket on the floor nearby, babbling nonsense to his stuffed giraffe. I'm surprised, Sarah said at one point, glancing at him with an amused expression. You don't seem like the type to invite staff to dinner. I'm not, he replied, his honesty surprisingly easy. You're not staff. Sarah. They ate together by candlelight. A simple meal. Nothing extravagant. But it was warmer, more genuinely enjoyable than any dinner Ethan had experienced in years. Afterward, to his own astonishment, he helped her clean the dishes. It felt both ridiculous and profoundly grounding, all at once. When the baby finally fell asleep, exhausted from his day of exploration, Sarah sat across from Ethan in the living room, her fingers curled around a warm mug of herbal tea. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. You don't talk much about your past, she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Is that by choice? He looked into the dancing flames, then back at her, her face softened by the firelight. It's easier that way. The less people know, the less they can use against you. That's not living, Ethan, she murmured. That's surviving. He let her words hang in the air, feeling their truth resonate deep within him. And for the first time in over a decade, he let someone see behind the polished, impenetrable surface. I was supposed to get married once, he began, the words feeling rusty from disuse. I trusted someone completely. She betrayed that trust in the worst way possible. It left a scar, deeper than I care to admit, even to myself. Sarah didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or pity. She just listened, her presence a quiet anchor. You're brave, he added, his gaze meeting hers. Coming here with a child, facing judgment, surviving every single day with such grace. I couldn't have done it. Sarah smiled softly, a genuine, heartfelt smile. I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Ethan. For a long moment, they just sat there, the pretense gone. Not boss and employee, not stranger and guest, but two people, tentatively, cautiously, discovering what it meant to be truly seen. As she stood to go, her tea finished, Ethan surprised them both by standing too. Sarah, he said, his voice earnest. You and Liam, you've changed this place. You've changed me. She paused at the doorway, turning back. I'm glad, she said softly, because you've changed us, too. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He kept replaying the look on her face, the warmth in her voice, and the delicate, terrifying line between what he was beginning to feel and what he was still terrified to fully admit, even to himself. The following day, a Saturday, Ethan canceled all his meetings. He took Liam out into the sprawling garden, holding him a little clumsily at first, as Sarah watched from the patio, stunned into silence. You're not working today? She finally asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. I am, he said, his gaze soft as he looked down at Liam, who was curiously patting his cheek. Just on something far more important. Sarah smiled, a radiant, unrestrained smile, as she joined them on the grass, the morning sun casting a golden, hopeful light across the manicured lawn. Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her, then at the child in his lap, so trusting and content. Do you think, he asked slowly, the question heavy with unspoken hopes and fears, it's ever truly possible to start again, from scratch, and actually build something real, something lasting? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and gently took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. Only if you're not afraid to tear down the old walls first. And in that precise moment, looking into her clear, honest eyes, Andrew realized something profound. For the first time in his life, he truly, desperately, wanted to. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Sarah walked into the garden and found Ethan already there, sitting on the dew-kissed grass, Liam asleep on his chest. The baby's tiny fingers were curled trustingly around the lapel of Ethan's soft cashmere sweater, and the look on Ethan's face was something she had never seen before. He looked utterly at peace, a serenity that smoothed the usually harsh lines of his face. She sat down beside him in comfortable silence, not wanting to break the precious spell. But he turned to her slowly, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I never imagined this, he confessed, a hint of wonder in his tone. Me, out here, holding a child, waiting for you. Sarah folded her legs beneath her, the gentle morning breeze tugging playfully at loose strands of her hair. Some things aren't meant to be imagined, Ethan, she replied, her voice equally soft. They're just meant to be lived. That afternoon, they cooked together again, but the earlier awkwardness was gone, replaced by an easy camaraderie. Liam crawled happily between their feet, babbling to a wooden spoon, while Sarah patiently taught Ethan how to properly fold pancake batter without overmixing. When he inevitably got it wrong, sending a puff of flour into the air, she laughed, a bright, carefree sound, and gently wiped a smudge of white from his cheek with her thumb. And when he finally got it right, producing a perfectly golden pancake, he looked at her not like he'd just won a multi-million-dollar contract, but something infinitely more valuable, more meaningful. Days melted into weeks, and the rhythm of the house shifted completely, organically. Ethan no longer locked himself away in his study for hours on end. He no longer instinctively flinched from Liam's joyous laughter or Sarah's voice humming softly as she moved through the hallways. He leaned into it, embraced it. He started leaving handwritten notes for Sarah, a thank you for a particularly delicious meal, a compliment on the flowers she'd arranged, a simple good morning. He even, to Sarah's utter astonishment, picked up a large, plush stuffed giraffe for Liam one afternoon, leaving it beside the baby's crib without saying a word. A silent offering. But change, real, transformative change, is never entirely smooth. One evening, as they sat on the patio under a string of fairy lights Sarah had shyly put up, Ethan turned to her, a visible nervousness in his eyes that was entirely new. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice a little unsteady. She waited, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. "I don't want this to be temporary anymore," he continued, his gaze earnest and direct. "I don't want you to stay just because you need a place or a job. I want you to stay because I want this to be your home." Sarah's lips parted, but no words came out first, her mind racing. "And I don't mean as a housekeeper," he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. "I mean as someone I want to share my life with. You, Liam, us." It wasn't the kind of grand, sweeping confession found in romance movies. There were no fireworks, no dramatic orchestral swells. But in the quiet intimacy of that moment, Sarah's heart beat so loudly she thought it might drown out the gentle chirping of the crickets. "You know," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "I never planned for any of this. I was just trying to survive." "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And so was I. Until you." Her eyes filled with tears, happy tears, and she laughed through them. A watery, joyful sound. "What about everything? The past, the scars, the fear. We bring it all," he said, reaching for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "And we build something new, something beautiful. Anyway." She leaned into him then, resting her forehead on his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. "Okay." And just like that, with that one simple word, they weren't two broken people clinging to survival mode anymore. There was something else entirely, something still fragile, perhaps, but full of a vibrant, undeniable hope. Weeks later, Sarah stood in the sun-drenched kitchen one morning, a simple, elegant gold band now adorning her left finger. Liam, now a confident toddler, toddled happily across the tiled floor, his small hand holding onto the hem of Ethan's casual slacks while Ethan poured coffee like a man who had done this simple, domestic act every day for years. And maybe, just maybe, he would. Ethan leaned down to press a soft kiss to Sarah's cheek, and she looked up at him, her eyes shining, with a smile that said everything words never could. Sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't the ones that start with grand, fiery passion and dramatic gestures. They're the ones that begin the quiet shadows of silence and sorrow, nurtured by patience and built on the foundation of second chances. where two people, against all odds, find a way to rebuild not just a life, but a family. And in this house, once so cold and lifeless, the warmth wasn't just from the fire in the hearth anymore. It came from the sound of laughter, the comforting scent of pancakes, and the profound, soul-deep feeling of belonging that even a hardened, solitary man like Ethan Carter never knew he was so desperately missing. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Did this story resonate with your heart? Do you believe in the power of second chances, even when all seems lost? If this story moved you, type 100 in the comments below and let us know which country you're tuning in from. Don't forget to share this video with someone who believes that love can indeed blossom in the most unexpected of places. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next heartwarming story. We appreciate your support.